The Olympic Games are a stage where human limits are constantly challenged. Athletes from all over the world train tirelessly to compete at the highest level, facing extreme conditions and risks inherent to their sports. Among medals won and records broken, there are stories that stand out not for triumph, but for tragedy. Amidst the glory, some competitors have faced danger in a definitive way, turning their names into memories marked by fatality. Throughout history, unexpected accidents and security failures have resulted in events that forever changed the way the Olympics are organized. But what led to these tragic moments? Could these deaths have been avoided, or were they just an inevitable risk of such intense sports? Hello, restless minds. I'm Code, and this is Discover It, where curiosity has no limits. Subscribe and help the channel grow, because every time you like, comment, or share, you're helping us bring these discoveries to more people. Together, we can create a community where curiosity can change the world. And now, without further ado, let's get to the video. In 1964, at the Winter Olympic Games in Innsbruck, Austria, the luge event was a new addition to the competition. Among the competitors was Kazimir Kay-Skipi, a 55-year-old British athlete and former Royal Air Force pilot. Can you imagine competing in an extreme sport at 55? While many people at that age are just trying not to slip in the bathroom, Kazimir Kay-Skipi was speeding down an icy track at over 100 kilometers per hour. But his bravery collided with something far more dangerous than age, a track full of flaws. His nickname among his peers was Uncle, a reference to his advanced age in a sport dominated by young athletes. Despite this, he maintained impressive vigor and trained with dedication, determined to prove he still had what it took to compete at a high level. His name would soon become part of Olympic history, but for a tragic reason. The luge track in Innsbruck had already been the subject of criticism. Reports from journalists and athletes pointed out serious flaws in the course: irregular sections, poorly compacted ice, and treacherous curves. Accidents were frequent, yet few measures were taken to fix the issues. In a competitive environment, many athletes accepted the risks as part of the challenge. But at what point does an obstacle become a real danger rather than just part of the competition? During one of his training runs, Kazimierz began his descent at high speed, navigating each turn with the precision that years of experience had given him. However, just meters before finishing his run, his sled lost control. The unstable ice caused it to wobble, and within seconds he was thrown off the track. His body violently collided with the frozen ground, suffering multiple fractures, including severe injuries to his skull and pelvis. The impact was so severe that the sound of the crash echoed throughout the track, drawing the attention of other competitors. He was quickly attended to and rushed to the nearest hospital. Doctors did everything they could to stabilize him, but the extent of his injuries made recovery uncertain. The next morning, while undergoing emergency surgery, his heart could not withstand the trauma. Kazimir Kay-Skipi passed away before the opening ceremony of the Games, turning the event into a period of mourning for the sports community. The impact of his death raised immediate questions. Was the track truly safe? Had the organizers taken all necessary precautions to protect the athletes? Instead of answers, speculations arose. Some suggested that his advanced age might have been a factor in the accident, while others argued that any athlete would have suffered the same consequences under those track conditions. What no one could deny was that the tragedy had exposed flaws that could not be ignored. Despite the outcry, the competition continued without major changes to the track structure. Kazimier's accident was quickly overshadowed by the unfolding events of the Games, but his death served as a grim warning about the dangers of extreme sports without proper safety measures. If precautions had been taken earlier, could this fate have been avoided? Milne was a promising young talent in the world of alpine skiing. carrying the responsibility of representing Australia at the 1964 Winter Olympic Games. At just 19 years old, he was part of a delegation determined to prove that athletes from a country without permanent snow could compete on equal footing with the world's best. His enthusiasm was evident, but the conditions he would face in Innsbruck were far from providing a safe environment for this showcase of talent. The downhill ski course prepared for the Games had already raised concerns among athletes. The city of Innsbruck was experiencing an unusual winter with little natural snow, forcing the organizers to transport artificial snow to complete the track. The result was an unstable surface with treacherous areas where ice mixed with exposed patches of dirt and rocks. Furthermore, the track lacked proper safety barriers. If a skier lost control at high speed, the only obstacle in their way would be scattered trees. Given this scenario, to what extent could the recklessness of the organizers be considered a greater risk factor than the inexperience of an athlete? On January 25th, during one of the official training sessions, Milne began his descent with technique and confidence. He had already demonstrated great skill in previous sections and maintained a solid pace. However, as he advanced to one of the steepest parts of the course, his line of sight became obstructed, preventing him from seeing what lay ahead. At a critical moment, he suddenly encountered people on the track, a severe organizational failure. With no time to react, Milne attempted an evasive maneuver, but the split-second decision cost him control. The young athlete lost his balance and was thrown off the track. His body collided violently with a tree, and the impact was immediate. Medical teams rushed to provide first aid, but the crash had caused severe internal injuries. He was airlifted to a nearby hospital, but despite the efforts of the medical team, it was in vain. Hours later, Ross Milne succumbed to his injuries, becoming the second fatal victim of the Olympics before the opening ceremony even took place. The tragedy raised questions that still echo in Olympic history. How could an athlete be blamed for their own death when the course presented so many evident dangers? Experts suggested that his lack of experience contributed to the accident, but this justification did not convince everyone. Many believed that regardless of the competitor's skill, the track conditions were the real determining factor in the tragic outcome. Even after his death, no substantial changes were made to the event's safety measures. The races continued as planned, and the official version subtly placed blame on Milne's lack of experience with extreme terrains. But with so many ignored warnings, one question still lingers. To what extent could an accident like this have been avoided if preventive measures had been taken in time? Speed skiing was an experimental event introduced at the 1992 Winter Olympic Games in Albertville, France. Now think about this, a sport where the sole objective is to go down a mountain as fast as possible. No obstacles, no technical maneuvers, just you, your skis, and gravity working against your survival. What could possibly go wrong, right? Unlike traditional alpine skiing, this event did not require precise maneuvers or technical jumps. The goal was simple and extreme: to reach the highest possible speed on a steep descent, pushing the limits of human ability and aerodynamics. For Nicolas Bochatay, a 27-year-old Swiss skier, this was an opportunity to showcase his skill in one of the fastest and most dangerous events ever seen at the Olympics. However, his participation would end in tragedy before he could even compete in the final. Bochatay was already an experienced athlete in the discipline, having trained for years to compete among the world's best. He understood the risks involved but trusted in his technique and specialized equipment. Competitors wore rigid aerodynamic suits and skis designed to minimize air resistance, allowing them to reach speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. The slightest mistake could result in a severe accident, but that was the nature of the sport. However, not every sports tragedy occurs within competition. On the morning of February 22, 1992, just hours before the final of the speed skiing event, Bochatay and a few other athletes decided to do a warm-up run on one of the resort's public slopes. It was a moment of relaxation before the pressure of the race, a descent without major concerns. But what should have been a simple training run turned into a fatal incident. The track they were using had not been fully secured, and a miscommunication between the maintenance team and the athletes would lead to a disastrous encounter. As Bochatay sped down the slope at considerable velocity, he did not notice that a large snowcat, a heavy vehicle used to groom the snow, was stationed just beyond a small ridge. When he reached the crest, the machine suddenly came into his field of view. By then, his speed was so high that any reaction would have been insufficient to avoid the collision. The impact was violent and instantaneous. Bochatay crashed directly into the metal structure of the vehicle, suffering fatal injuries on the spot. The accident sent shockwaves through the Olympic Games. How could an athlete suffer such a severe accident outside of competition in what was supposed to be a controlled environment? The organizers quickly classified the incident as an unfortunate accident, stating that safety measures had been adequate. However, conflicting reports emerged. Some claimed that visibility on the track was compromised, while others questioned whether the vehicle was properly marked. None of that changed the fact that an Olympic athlete had lost his life under circumstances that could have been prevented. The impact of this accident was significant. Although Bochatay's tragedy did not occur during the official competition, his case contributed to the decision never to make speed skiing a permanent Olympic sport. The extreme speeds and inherent risks were deemed unacceptable for an event that already had a history of accidents. But the question that remains to this day is inevitable. Would a tragedy like this have occurred if the safety rules had been stricter? At the 2010 Winter Olympic Games in Vancouver, the Whistler Sliding Center was designed to be the fastest luge track ever built. The organizers wanted to create a spectacle, an event where athletes would reach unprecedented speeds. However, from the very first test runs, the course had already proven to be excessively dangerous. Several competitors suffered crashes during training, and experts warned that the track's sharp curves and extreme incline could lead to serious accidents. Even so, the competitions continued without modifications, and the risks would soon prove fatal. Nodar Kumaritashvili, a 21-year-old Georgian athlete, was one of the competitors striving to qualify in the event. He came from a family with a long tradition in luge and had trained for years for this moment. Despite his dedication, he lacked extensive experience on high-speed tracks like Whistler. His goal was simple: complete the descent, learn to control the track, and secure a solid performance for the competition. What he didn't know was that his name would forever be remembered in Olympic history, not for his performance, but for an irreversible tragedy. On February 12, 2010, during one of the official training runs, Kumaritashvili began his descent at the Whistler Sliding Center. At first, everything seemed under control. His sled cut through the ice at staggering speeds, surpassing 140 kilometers per hour. However, as he approached Curve 16, a section known among athletes as 50-50 due to its high accident rate, he lost control of his sled. The equipment wobbled, and in a matter of seconds, Nodar was thrown off the track. The impact was devastating. His body collided directly with a steel pillar with no protective barrier in place. First responders arrived quickly, attempting to revive him right there on the ice. The scene turned into one of sheer desperation, with doctors and technicians desperately trying to save the young athlete's life. He was rushed to the hospital, but his injuries were irreversible. Shortly after his death was confirmed, the Olympic Games, which had not yet officially begun, were already marked by an irreparable loss. The shock was immediate. During the opening ceremony, the Georgian delegation marched in mourning, wearing black armbands in honor of their fallen teammate. However, what outraged athletes and experts the most was the response from the organizers. The International Olympic Committee declared that the accident was caused by human error, suggesting that Kumaritashvili lacked the experience to handle such an extreme track. But did that justification make sense? If even the most experienced athletes had already suffered crashes on that track, was the problem really the competitors' skill level? Following the tragedy, an investigation was launched, but the changes came too late. Small adjustments were made to the track to reduce speed, but the undeniable fact remained. A young athlete had lost his life in an accident that could have been prevented. His name became a symbol of an ignored warning and a serious failure in Olympic safety. And the question that still echoes among athletes is inevitable: how many more warnings will it take before real changes are made? The 1912 Olympic Games, held in Stockholm, Sweden, featured a brutal endurance event, the marathon. The 40-kilometer course, run under intense heat, became a true test of survival for the competitors. Among the athletes was Francisco Lazaro, a 21-year-old Portuguese runner who had won 3 national titles and now carried the responsibility of representing his country in Portugal's first-ever Olympic appearance. What should have been a moment of glory, however, would turn into one of the darkest episodes in the history of the event. July 14th began with temperatures far higher than expected for that time of year. The scorching heat and low humidity made the race even more challenging. Of the 95 registered athletes, only 68 chose to face the extreme conditions. Determined to complete the race, Francisco Lazaro adopted a risky strategy. To prevent sunburn and minimize wind resistance, he covered parts of his body with a thin layer of wax, believing it would protect him during the run. But this decision would have fatal consequences. Seriously, the guy covered himself in wax before the marathon. The idea was good, but the effect was the opposite. His skin simply stopped sweating. Basically, he turned himself into a human oven in the middle of a scorching summer. From the first kilometers, the race proved to be merciless. The runners battled against the heat, thirst, and physical exhaustion. Lazaro started strong, maintaining a solid pace and advancing among the leaders. However, around the 30-kilometer mark, he began showing signs of extreme exhaustion. His body was already overheating and unable to sweat. Due to the wax layer, his internal temperature skyrocketed. Suddenly, in front of spectators and race officials, Lazaro staggered and collapsed. He was immediately assisted, but his condition was critical. His body was burning with fever, a sign of severe hyperthermia. Doctors tried to cool him down, but the damage was already done. A few hours later, he fell into a coma, and the next morning his death was confirmed. Francisco Lazaro became the first athlete to die during an Olympic competition. The Portuguese runner's death sent shockwaves through the sporting world and raised concerns about the safety of marathon races. Were athletes truly prepared to endure such extreme conditions? Should the organizers have adjusted the race or provided better support to the competitors? At the time, there were no strict rules regarding hydration, and runners were forced to continue regardless of their physical condition. Lazaro's case served as a wake-up call for future competitions, but changes to the rules only came decades later. Today, marathons include mandatory hydration stations and medical monitoring systems to ensure such situations are avoided. But for Francisco Lazaro, caution came too late. His name was not immortalized on the podium, but rather as a reminder that the pursuit of glory can sometimes come at an unbearably high price. How many lessons like this were needed before sports became safer? At the Rio de Janeiro 2016 Paralympic Games, Bahman Golbarnezhad represented Iran in the road cycling event. A veteran of the Iran-Iraq War, he had lost a leg during the conflict, but found a new path to overcoming adversity through sports. After excelling in weightlifting, he transitioned to cycling, dedicating himself fully to the discipline. At 48 years old, he was determined to complete the race and bring pride to his country. What no one expected was that the course held unforeseen dangers and that his ride would end in tragedy. The road cycling event was held on a challenging course featuring steep descents and tight curves through the streets of Rio de Janeiro. Throughout the competition, athletes had to rely on a mix of physical endurance and technical skill to navigate the unpredictable terrain. Track safety was a constant concern, but few questioned the real risks until the moment an accident changed the tone of the race. On the penultimate lap, as he descended one of the most dangerous sections of the circuit, Golbarnezhad lost control of his bicycle on a sharp turn. The impact was severe. He crashed into a rocky embankment, being thrown violently from his bike. The medical team was immediately called, and he received first aid on the scene before being rushed to the hospital. However, his condition deteriorated on the way. Shortly after arriving at the medical facility, his death was confirmed due to severe head trauma. The accident caused deep sorrow among athletes and organizers. During the closing ceremony of the Paralympic Games, a moment of silence was held in his honor, and Iran's flag was flown at half-mast. However, beyond the grief, questions arose about the safety of the event. Was the section where the accident occurred properly marked and protected? Were the track conditions appropriate for athletes with disabilities? The official investigation concluded that safety barriers were insufficient and that changes should have been made before the race. Golbarnezhad's death sparked an important discussion about safety in Paralympic cycling. The sport requires careful adaptation of courses to ensure the well-being of competitors, but these factors are not always given the attention they deserve. Following his death, the International Paralympic Committee began reviewing course safety regulations more rigorously to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Despite the tributes and promises of reform, Golbarnezhad's accident raises a difficult question. At what point are the risks of sport part of the competition, and when do they become unacceptable organizational failures? His death was not just a personal tragedy, but a stark reminder that, in sports, safety should never be a secondary concern. Have all the necessary lessons truly been learned? At the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games, a special glider flight demonstration was included in the event, bringing aviation pioneers to showcase their skill and innovation. Among them was Ignaz Stiefsohn, an Austrian expert in mastering air currents. He was not competing for medals, but rather to impress the audience with a flawless flight and to promote gliding as a potential Olympic sport. However, what was meant to be a spectacular display turned into one of the most tragic incidents ever recorded at the Games. Stiefsohn was known for his mastery of gliders, engineless aircraft that rely solely on natural forces to stay aloft. His flights were characterized by precise maneuvers and remarkable technical control. On August 3rd, in front of thousands of spectators, he prepared for another demonstration, a planned performance to strengthen the case for gliding as an official Olympic discipline. But before the main show, he decided to conduct a test flight to assess wind conditions and ensure a perfect presentation. The pilot took off in his glider using thermal currents over the airfield. Initially, everything went as expected. He made a few smooth, controlled turns, analyzing the aircraft's stability. However, minutes later, something unexpected happened. At a considerable altitude, one of the wings suffered a structural failure. The glider abruptly lost lift and began spiraling out of control. The audience watched in silence as the pilot tried to regain control, but there was too little time for any effective action. Imagine this. A perfect flight in front of thousands of spectators showcasing the beauty of gliding, and then, out of nowhere, a wing simply breaks off mid-air. That's exactly what happened. As altitude dropped rapidly, Stiefsohn made his final decision. He deployed his emergency parachute. However, due to the low altitude at the time of deployment, the parachute did not have enough time to slow his descent. The aviator hit the ground with fatal impact as the horrified crowd looked on. Medics rushed to his aid, but there was nothing they could do. His death was confirmed minutes later. The accident had an immediate impact. The discussions about making gliding an Olympic discipline were quickly abandoned, and investigations into the cause of the structural failure began. Experts speculated about a possible defect in the wing's material or a design flaw in the glider. Others questioned whether the pressure to deliver a spectacular performance had led the pilot to push safety limits. Regardless of the cause, the tragedy tainted an attempt at Olympic innovation. Ignaz Stiefsohn's death served as a warning about the dangers of motorless flight and emphasized the need for improvements in sports aviation engineering and safety. Over time, gliding became a recognized and safe practice, but it remained outside the Olympic stage. The The question left after his fall was inevitable. How far should human limits be tested in the name of spectacle? At the 1960 Rome Olympic Games, the road cycling event stood out not just for the fierce competition, but for an incident that would forever change the history of sports. Knud Enemark Jensen, a 23-year-old Danish cyclist, was part of the 100 kilometers team time trial event. The scorching summer heat of Rome made the race even more grueling, demanding extreme endurance from the competitors. But beyond the weather, other factors were at play that day, factors that would raise suspicions and lead to a transformation in Olympic rules. The race took place under temperatures nearing 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. From the start, cyclists battled exhaustion as the intense heat rapidly drained their energy. The Danish team struggled, and in an effort to prevent Jensen and his teammates from losing pace, the team's coach provided them with a stimulant, a common practice at the time, as performance-enhancing substances were not yet regulated. Despite the extreme exertion and harsh conditions, the athletes pushed on, determined to finish the race. Jensen began showing clear signs of severe fatigue. His pedaling became unsteady, his body wavered, and with each passing kilometer, it seemed increasingly difficult for him to stay on the bike. At a critical moment, his teammates attempted to hold onto his jersey to keep him on track. Their efforts were in vain. Just moments later, the cyclist completely lost control and collapsed onto the scorching asphalt. The impact was severe. Jensen hit his head on the ground and lost consciousness instantly. Paramedics were called in urgently, trying to revive him on site, while the suffocating heat made rescue efforts even more difficult. He was rushed to a nearby medical station, where attempts were made to cool him down, but by then, the damage was irreversible. A few hours later, his death was confirmed, sending shockwaves through the sports community. Initial investigations pointed to heat exhaustion as the cause of death, but other details soon emerged. The Danish team's coach admitted to administering Roniacol, a vasodilator, to Jensen and his teammates to improve circulation and increase endurance. While the substance was not illegal at the time, its role in the incident raised concerns about the dangers of stimulants. Some reports suggested that he might have ingested other substances besides the vasodilator, but no official confirmation was ever made. Knud Enemark Jensen's death became a turning point in Olympic sports. The case accelerated discussions on doping regulations, and 8 years later, in 1968, the International Olympic Committee implemented the first drug tests in Olympic history. From that moment on, the use of performance-enhancing substances became strictly monitored, permanently altering the landscape of elite sports. Even with all the changes that followed, one question remains. To what extent does the pressure of high-performance sports push athletes to exceed the natural limits of their bodies? Jensen's death was not just a milestone for cycling safety, but also a grim reminder that the pursuit of victory, when taken to the extreme, can cost far more than just a medal. The stories of these athletes are tragic reminders that while the Olympic spirit represents perseverance and glory, it also comes with undeniable risks. From treacherous ice tracks to dangerous cycling circuits, each of these deaths expose flaws that could have been prevented. Some of these events led to significant changes, such as the implementation of anti-doping tests and improved safety measures across various sports. However, the question remains, how many more tragedies must occur before the risks of sports are fully minimized? If you enjoyed this journey of discoveries, don't forget to leave a like, share with your friends, and comment below on what caught your attention the most. Maybe others will relate, and together we can create a great discussion. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more content where curiosity knows no limits.